Good morning and welcome to our webinar this morning. Thanks for joining us. This morning we're going to be talking about the Worker Protection Act, which is very topical at the moment. The reason that we decided to host this webinar this morning is we've been getting quite a lot of questions from existing clients and potential clients around how they might approach adherence to the Act, what it means for them, and whether their current whistleblowing procedures and systems are going to be able to be adapted and are going to be fit for purpose. So that's what we're planning on talking about today. But before we get into that, I just wanted to introduce us both for any of you who've not met us previously. So I'm Joanna Lewis. I'm the Managing Director here at SafeCall. SafeCall, as you hopefully will be aware, are a whistleblowing services business. We offer a range of services across the whistleblowing piece, and we'll talk a little bit about those services in a little while and how they might help you with regards to this Act. And I'm joined today by Eve Maxwell, and Eve is going to be taking us through the majority of the information today. Eve's the expert on this. Eve's background is she's spent many years in learning and development and HR and training, and has worked in lots of different sectors, such as education, where legislation and adherence to legislation is obviously very key. So this is a subject close to her heart. So today we're going to talk about a number of different topics. I should have put my glasses on because I can't see these on the screen, but we're going to talk about at a high level, what is the Worker Protection Act? What does it mean for employers? And as you can see here, so what kind of steps should you be thinking about taking, or perhaps you've already taken them? Thinking about third parties and how do they apply, or how should you be thinking about them when you think about protecting your employees? What might happen if we do get it wrong, and what steps can you take to protect employees from sexual harassment? Investigations, because investigations are really key, making sure that we investigate promptly and efficiently and transparently, and then any other kind of steps that you might want to think about taking. What we are also planning on doing is that you can see that there's a chat, and hopefully you can, I think you can, well, it sounds as though I can see the chat there, that there's been an echo. Hopefully you can hear us okay. Please do put any questions that you want to ask in the chat. We'll answer some of them at the end. We're also planning on doing a follow-up session with some of our legal partners, where you can ask more legally focused questions. So do feel free to put those in the chat as well, or alternatively, you can send them to us afterwards, and we'll be doing that session in the next couple of weeks. So without further ado, I'll be quiet and I'll hand over to Eve.
Thanks, Jo. Good morning, everybody. The first thing to say, of course, 26th of October, this is when the Worker Protection Act comes in force. So we thought, 11 days, it's very timely for us to talk about the Worker Protection Act and what it means for businesses, what you can do, what you can put in place. So we thought it would be best to start with a definition of sexual harassment. So sexual harassment is when a person's subjected to unwanted conduct that really creates this horrible environment for the individual, violates their dignity, and creates this hostile, degrading environment. The key thing here is about that attention being unwanted. So it's not whether the person intends to cause offence, it's the outcome of that, the impact on the individual. Sexual harassment also occurs if someone's treated less favourably because they submitted to or rejected that unwanted conduct. So, this is really off the back of things like the Me Too movement and, a growing awareness that sexual harassment, is more prevalent in society than we would wish it to be. So the Worker Protection Act is really putting an onus on employers to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. So as we said, 11 days, the clock is ticking to put some things in place. And just a key point here is that this legislation is anticipatory. So what this means is you can't wait until there's an issue, you can't wait till there's a problem and then react to it. You've got to do something proactive now before there is an issue, because what we really want to do is prevent sexual harassment from happening in the first place by putting in place some reasonable steps. So I guess the next question is, what are reasonable steps? What does this mean? And reasonable steps, it's really going to vary based on the size of your organisation, the sector that you're in, and the working environment. So there's going to be different risks depending on your organisation. Every organisation's unique, so a one-size-fits-all approach isn't really going to work. This is about looking at the risks that your employees face and putting steps in place to mitigate those risks. So a really, really useful document to look at is the Equality and Human Rights Commission technical guidance. And this is so helpful for organisations, because it basically lays out, the things that you need to be mindful of and the things that you can put in place. And one of the examples that they cite when it comes to reasonable steps is about a female working in a construction sector, going out to do an initial site visit. What they're saying is, the manager should be having a discussion with that individual and saying, are you comfortable doing that? Would you prefer it if someone went with you? So thinking about, the potential risks that individual might face and putting steps in place to mitigate it. This is a very specific example for the construction industry. Your organisation is going to be very different. So it's about thinking about your employees day to day, what risks are they coming into contact with, and what do we need to put in place to really take reasonable steps to protect employees. The final thing to say, of course, is that employees should never ignore concerns about sexual harassment. The expectation is that if a report of sexual harassment is made, the employer is going to do something about that. So they're going to respond to that. They're going to look into that because they need to put things right. So another section of the legislation is around third parties. Now, liability for harassment under equality legislation doesn't extend to third parties, but, and it's a big but, employers do need to take steps to prevent sexual harassment by third parties under this legislation. So again, this is one of those things where every business is going to be really different. And it's looking at, the kind of third parties that your employees are coming into contact with. So, customers, contractors, suppliers, how are you going to make sure that, your stance on preventing sexual harassment is made clear to third parties? Is it, how are you going to notify them that, sexual harassment is something that you are actively preventing, you're doing something about, you've got zero tolerance stance on? So every business is going to be different. It's all about risk assessment. It's looking at, what are your employees doing, who are they coming into contact with, what steps do we need to put in place? The bar is quite a high one for taking reasonable steps. And if you're not doing those risk assessments, if you're not looking at what's happening in the day-to-day, it's very unlikely that you would be able to say to an employment tribunal, say, I took reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment, if you're not having a really good close eye at what's happening in your workplace. So what are the consequences of getting it wrong? Well, the Equality and Human Rights Commission can take enforcement action if they believe an employer has failed to comply with the preventative duty. And this can be things like investigating an organisation. It can be things like, show us that you've got a decent action plan to, put things right where there has been a case of sexual harassment, or how are you going to prevent it in the future? So, this is an added bit of scrutiny that the organisation might be under. There's also, if an employee were to successfully win a sexual harassment case in an employment tribunal, and the employer couldn't show that they'd taken reasonable steps to prevent that sexual harassment, there could be an increase of 25% in the compensation. So, you've got potential enforcement action, you've got potential monetary consequences, but I think, one of the things to also bear in mind is the reputational damage. You don't want to be known as an organisation that ignores sexual harassment or doesn't protect their employees. That can have really severe consequences in terms of trust. Are your employees going to lose a bit of trust in you? What about your customers? It doesn't do your brand any good, really. So getting it wrong, not what you want. So what steps can employers take to protect employees from sexual harassment? There are lots and lots of things organisations can do, and it really, again, this one size fits all isn't going to cover everybody, but these are some of the things that we would recommend employers do to really protect employees. And we're coming from a place where for years and years we've been advising employers about how to protect whistleblowers. So, protecting employees that may be complaining or reporting about sexual harassment is very much sort of something that we're used to sort of talking about. So the first thing to do, of course, is review and update your policies and procedures to really reflect those legal requirements. You might be thinking, oh, well, my bullying and harassment policy, that's a great starting point. But also have a think about some of your other policies as well. So, what are going to be the consequences if an employee is found to have sexually harassed somebody else? Are you going to need to take a look at your disciplinary policy? So it's looking at it in the round, looking at the bigger picture and making it really clear, what constitutes sexual harassment, but also what the consequences are as well. The second thing to think about is establishing really clear procedures about what happens, if there is a report of sexual harassment. And, the individuals who are part of that process and part of that procedure really do need to be confident that they know what they're doing and also have the knowledge and skills to be able to handle those reports in an appropriate way. Training is huge. This is one thing that you can do to raise awareness. So training for all employees. Do they know what sexual harassment is? Do they know the line between what's banter and what is offensive? How are we going to communicate those messages to employees? They also need to know about their role in preventing harassment and how to report sexual harassment if it does occur. In our experience, when somebody has a concern and they are worried about something, they generally go to their line managers as a first port of call. So it would really benefit your managers if they had some additional training about sexual harassment, because they don't just need to know how to identify it and how to report it and those things. They also need to know how to protect the employee and support them, because sexual harassment, it can be very, very upsetting, very, very concerning for the individual. So the managers need those soft skills to be able to handle situations that can be quite difficult and can be quite upsetting. Raising awareness also hugely important. This is another one of those one size fits all doesn't work scenarios. Every organisation has their own ways of communicating, and communicating about sexual harassment needs to be pretty effective. So think about things like posters, workshops, team meetings. If you've got an intranet, can you put something on the landing page? And senior leaders have a key role to play here too. Senior leaders set the tone for an organisation. So it would, they really do need to lead on this and communicate that zero tolerance stance to sexual harassment. Role modelling, creating that culture where it's inclusive, it's respectful, and you've got the right sorts of behaviours going on in your organisation. Risk assessments. We talked a little bit about risk assessments earlier. This is about, identifying where the risks are and maybe mitigating those risks. I hate to be a party pooper. We've got Christmas coming up, but thinking about situations where people are maybe coming together in more high risk scenarios where there's maybe alcohol, inhibitions are lowered. How are you going to to set expectations around behaviour when it comes to things like social situations or working away, looking at things like your lone workers policy, looking at areas where there might be a greater risk of sexual harassment. So again, that's going to vary. That's going to be, unique to your organisation. People who have been the victim of sexual harassment are often very hesitant to speak up, and we've seen that, in news headlines. We've seen that through, the likes of the Me Too movement, and they might not feel comfortable speaking to somebody internally. They might not want to go to their manager. So, have you got other avenues or other channels in place to be able to give employees a voice, give them a chance to raise concerns and report sexual harassment? So, the reporting channels need to be accessible, they need to be easy to use. And many of our customers are coming to us now and saying, we've got a safe call confidential hotline. Can I use this for sexual harassment? The answer is yes. We've got those trained call handlers who are used to dealing with sensitive situations. It's 24 hours. Yes. If you want to use your confidential hotline for that, it's a great tool to have. So, think about how you're going to gather those reports in about sexual harassment, and having something that's confidential, having something where the person can stay anonymous if need be, can be a really useful tool, because you can be building up that confidence that, employee can speak up and they have a safe place to report their concerns. The final things around support for employees, what have you got in place in your organisation? We're talking about, something that's potentially very upsetting, very sensitive. Do you have access to employee assistance programs or counselling? If you have got those things in place, promote them, raise awareness, because what you're basically telling your employees is, we care about your well-being, we want to hear from you, and we're here to support you. So there are lots of things that you can do. It's about looking at what you've already got and thinking, where can we plug any gaps? Where have we got some missing steps that we could potentially take? So, investigation. So we want to put lots of things in place to prevent sexual harassment from happening in the first place. But, there is a chance that sexual harassment will happen in your workplace. And this is another element to this, being prepared. So plan to receive some reports. So if you can set out your procedures early doors, if you've got things in place, that you're already a step ahead. When it comes to investigations, when it comes to people making reports, investigations, you don't want this hanging about. You don't want this something that goes on and on and on. Investigations should be conducted promptly. They need to be fair. They need to be confidential. And this is a really good time to hold that mirror up and say, what have we got in place? Let's be honest. Do we have the resources? Do we have the expertise? Do we have the knowledge to investigate sexual harassment reports? If you're looking at that and thinking, I'm not sure, maybe there are some gaps, have a think now about, do we need to train up people to do investigations? Do we need actually Do we need some external support with investigations? You know, start looking around now for, you know, things that you can do to, if you are in that situation where someone is putting forward concerns or reports about sexual harassment. So another key thing really is you've put all these steps in place. You've got your training sorted, you've got your policy sorted, you've put lots of things in, you're communicating your stance on sexual harassment. That's brilliant. How do you know it's effective? How do you know it works? So, if you think about organisations, they never stand still. So this isn't something you can just do once and then tick a box and say, great, we've done it. This is about monitoring and reviewing as you go. So are our procedures working? Is our policy clear enough? Getting some feedback from people who are involved. So if someone has raised a concern, how did they feel that went? How is it working from a manager perspective, from an HR perspective? So it's gathering feedback and monitoring and reviewing as you go. Get some feedback from stakeholders, and I don't just mean people who are involved in the sexual harassment element. It's getting feedback from your employees generally. What is it like for them? What is their workplace culture like? Do they feel safe? Do they feel protected? Is it clear that they know who to contact if there is an issue? So things like staff surveys can be really, really useful. Forums, if you have employee forums within your organisation, they can be a great source. Also things like focus groups. So anytime when employees are giving you feedback, it's like gold dust, really. Also look at things like exit interviews. What are people saying about your organisation? So your employees are giving you information a lot of the time. It's, have you got a way of collecting that and seeing, does this work? Is our process working? Using a system to manage, monitor, investigate reports. If you need to be able to demonstrate that you are complying with the Worker Protection Act. So if you can keep all of your information in one place and you can look at that data, you're looking for trends, you're looking for hotspots. Are there any areas that need extra action? How have we investigated? What outcomes have we come to? Having all of that stuff in a system can make life a whole lot easier. So, keeping records, demonstrate compliance is really something that you need to be doing, because we don't know yet. The act doesn't come into force in 11 days, but the feel of it from technical guidance is that the Equality and Human Rights Commission are going to be looking and monitoring and seeing how organisations are going. So, if you've got those records, you're already a step ahead. And I'm going to hand back to Jo for a bit of a summary.
Thanks, Eve, and that was a great overview. And I think, I suppose the sort of high-level summary would be protecting workers from sexual harassment is not a new thing, and we're aware that you will all have lots of stuff in place already, but this is just about, well, what additional protections can we offer? We know that this is coming into force next week, so it needs, if it hasn't been reviewed, it needs reviewing now, and there's support around that. As you said, the key, and I've seen lots of questions coming in about this, and we will cover it in a moment, but looking at what those key risks are and really identifying for your organisation what it is that you need to be thinking about is absolutely the key thing to do first. And then, as Eve said, and it's a subject close to our hearts, of course, offering those channels so that employees feel safe to be able to have the conversation, to be able to speak up. We'd all like to think that everyone could come and we have an open door policy and people will be able to come and talk to us. But in reality, when it's a sensitive subject like this, it's not always the case. And being able to provide that sort of anonymous, independent, or just anonymous tool is really going to hopefully give people the confidence that they can speak up and have that conversation with you. Training is really important, and Eve touched on this, but there's lots of different training that you might want to consider. and we'll talk in a second some of the things that we offer, but there's plenty of training out there. But I think it's really important to think about your managers and equipping your managers well, so that they understand what their obligations are, so that they feel confident with how to deal with somebody who comes to talk to them about something like this, and that they feel that they're able to support any of their teams when they do speak up to them. And also that internal communication and awareness. Like Eve said, this comes right from the senior leadership all the way down the organisation. It's really important that everybody is walking that walk and speaking about the zero tolerance culture. And then finally, what this will hopefully, if not already in place, what this will hopefully promote is that positive working culture. We all want to work in an environment where we feel really happy and positive when we come to work, and putting these steps in place and communicating them should give employees that confidence that you're a great employer. So just to talk a little bit about some of the services that SafeCall offer around this. We are a whistleblowing services provider, and already we have 1,000 clients globally. Many of our clients use the system to promote for collecting sexual harassment reports. So you don't need to put a new hotline in place, and that's a question that we've been asked quite a lot recently, as you'd imagine. There are also options within the system to be able to create a specific form. So you could have a separate form which you could collect your sexual harassment reports completely separately to other types of whistleblowing reports. There are categories that you can put within the system so that you can report against those things. So you're able to segregate that should you want to do that. We do have quite a lot of training in general around sort of speaking up and how to deal with reports that are coming in. We have also we train managers on how to investigate in a way that is going to be positive for everyone involved. We offer investigation training. And I did see somebody asked a question about e-learning. There is quite a lot of e-learning that we offer around this subject specifically, so around sexual harassment and also around sort of wider whistleblowing for managers and employees. So that's certainly something that we would love to talk to you about if that's of interest, because I think e-learning actually is a really great way of sort of upskilling and giving knowledge to a large number of individuals, and then following up with your internal communications is a really great way of embedding that, I think, within the organisation. Depending on, I suppose, the number of reports that you're getting generally, we also offer case management, because I think what's really important here is, and something we haven't really touched on too much is how you respond to those reports, the kind of, how quickly you go back to the person who's raised the report, whether they're anonymous or not, through a system, so how you communicate, how you collect that information, how you carry out that investigation, and then how you share your findings. So we have software that can support with that so that you can manage that all within one place, and then also report on that as well. So you may have obligations internally for reporting, and we have software that can support with that. And I will be quiet in a moment to get to some of your questions. But the final thing is, what we also see is that in certain circumstances, organisations look to an independent third party to support with some more sensitive investigations potentially, or where they feel that independent view or sort of just additional support would be useful. And that is something that we've supported clients on as well. So if there was anything around that you would be looking for any support on, we'd be very happy to have a conversation. So I think they're the main things that I wanted to touch on. And I think we should probably go to questions because I'm conscious of time. We've had quite a few that have come in. So I will read some of them out. I think some of them we absolutely can answer, and some of them, like I said at the beginning, it would be quite, whilst we might have a view and an answer, what I would like to do is also engage with one of our legal experts to get, and either we'll set up that second session, or we can also send out kind of the Q&A afterwards, so that you get the absolute legal answer as well as our kind of interpretation of that. So without further ado, I've made some notes, Eve, here. And so assuming I can read them. So there's been quite a lot of questions around the risk assessments and how the approach to those, and whether we have like a template for risk assessments. We don't have a specific template for risk assessments. Something that we do offer generally from a whistleblowing, which I suppose encompasses all of this perspective, is we offer a health check, which kind of looks at policies and looks at the whole sort of process that you're putting in place and gives feedback on whether there's maybe any gaps within the process and what you're thinking about. So there is like a checklist that comes with that, which we can share the kind of the basic checklist. It's a free of charge checklist. Then there's also additional services we offer around that, but we don't have a specific risk assessment. It is, again, something we can ask our legal partners. But I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Eve?
I think, certainly when I worked in education and we had a lot of legislative duties, risk assessments were really a key part of that. So there might be somebody, we used to lean very heavily on things like health and safety or compliance, and they generally have those sorts of templates in those sorts of areas of the business where you're looking at, what are the risks, what are you going to put in place, what's the likelihood of this happening. So you're taking a sort of looking at it in the round and think, the great thing about a risk assessment is it really does force you to look at what steps you can take and what are those risky areas. So for sexual harassment, it's, there are key areas that are more risky. So if you have a lot of power imbalances in your workplace, so you might, if you've got workers that are maybe on insecure contracts or things like that, where they're on a fixed term, they might not feel as if they can speak up. Or if you've got a very hierarchical organisation, it might take we're asking an awful lot of somebody to speak up if they don't feel that they've got the power to do that. So this is where things like a confidential hotline really comes into its own, because it's creating that space for people to speak in a safe environment. There are other things that you can do as well around things like power dynamics. Managers have an absolute key part to play in this. It's creating that environment where people feel that they can speak up. Other risky areas, if you've got lone working, that's a particular risky element. So what can you put in place there to protect your lone workers? What about people who've got customer-facing duties? I was reading something the other day about some of the difficulties that are faced by people who work in retail, for example. So what can you do there to make it very, very clear what your stance is around sexual harassment, and also put things in place for the individuals to feel safe. Alcohol, work trips away, social activities. You don't want to be really heavy, you don't want to be a party pooper, but actually, this is about, setting out expectations and this is a work event really. So this is how we expect you to behave in these situations. Also, and this is quite a tricky one, really. It's about what is your culture like? Have you got, what is acceptable? Is it okay to make rude jokes? Is it not okay to make rude jokes? Where is the line? And so it's kind of like being really open about what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable within your organisation.
Thanks, Eve. Another one just aligned to that is somebody asked whether or not one kind of risk assessment that sort of encompasses the business is sufficient, or whether, for the different things that you mentioned, like whether it's a social event or, the power imbalances that you've just talked about whether there should be individual risk assessments maybe carried out, and whether they should be the same people or different people. So it's just around how to approach that whole risk assessment piece, really.
I think it's going to depend on your business, really. And if I was doing it, this is just, you know, Eve Maxwell PLC. This is not anything else. How I would probably tackle it would be to have a risk assessment for sexual harassment with the different risks identified all in the same place, because you're thinking about it in the round for a start. You've got it all in one place, and if you were ever asked to produce that risk assessment, it's there. So, you know, you're saying, look, we've conducted a risk assessment, we've looked at the risk of sexual harassment, we've thought about what we're going to put in place to prevent it, and it's sort of at your fingertips, and it's there. And it also means when it comes to that monitoring and review, you're not having to look at lots and lots of different things. It's all there in one place, and you're looking at it sort of holistically. So in the round, looking at it and thinking, well, what do we need to, what's working well, what isn't working so well, what extra steps might we need to put in place if our risk assessment hasn't captured everything. So your risk assessment really is a working document, and you want all of that stuff in the one place.
Very good. We've been asked, and I'm not expecting necessarily that you will be able to answer this question, Eve, but we've been asked a question which I think a lot of people will be thinking about, which is how to manage historic investigations. And it's certainly something that we have come across previously from an investigations perspective, where organisations have, have historical allegations that have been raised, and it's really difficult because it depends how long ago it was, and it depends on the nature of it and what evidence can be, actually collected in an investigation. So it's something that certainly when we do our follow-up session with our legal partners, we'll ask them to talk about in a bit more detail, because they will be able to add a lot of colour to that question. But I think it's without understanding, I suppose, the detail behind the history, it's a really difficult question to answer, but I understand why you've asked it. So that's not a great answer, and apologies for that, but we will cover that one in a follow-up session. And also, if there was a specific question behind that, Tim Smith, who's our head of investigations, would probably be quite a good person to speak to as well, because he will have come across those sorts of situations and be able to give a view on that. The other question, again, that I think it would be worth us bringing up in the next session is, does the legislation extend to events where people aren't actually at work? So things like where they're volunteering or not paid as such. I'm not sure of the answer on that, Eve. I don't know if you have an answer for that one.
I think that would be a brilliant question.
So Colin, we'll come back to you on that. We will, as a follow-up to this, we'll be sharing the slides, which was also a question that was asked. We've also got a blog that we'll be sharing, and we will put some answers together for the Q&A, but we'll also give you a date and time for a follow-up session with one of our legal partners, which we can do live, live Q&A, which I think could be interesting. A lot of questions around e-learning as well. So the e-learning we have is very flexible and can be put onto your own learning platform, as well as we have a learning platform that we can offer. So again, we will follow up individually with information, and if you would like a conversation about that, then please let us know, because we'd be very happy to have that conversation, and you can have a look at all of the e-learning videos that are available and see if there's something that you feel would be appropriate for your organisation. They can be edited as well, so you can edit them so that they're specific for your organisation rather than just generic videos. And then I think I'm conscious of time. Last question from Christine that I've got in front of me, and again I think this might be a good one for a follow-up, is, does the Act extend to subsidiaries organisation domiciled abroad? Great question, because it's a UK Act, and again we will follow that up. So thank you for that question, Christine. I will make a note of it. And Dawn has shared a useful document in the chat, so that's good to see as well, around an example of a risk assessment. As Eve says, there's lots and lots of different examples of risk assessments, and I'm sure that you will be able to adapt one for your needs. So I think all remains to say is, if I've missed any questions, apologies. As I say, we're going to be following up with you all. Thanks so much for joining this morning. It's quite miserable here in the northeast, so I hope it's nice wherever you all are. We will look forward to sharing a follow-up session with you. Hopefully you can all join us. Anything final from you, Eve?
No, thank you so much for joining us on this wet Tuesday. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.